Magandang hapon mo sa ating lahat. At maraming salamat po, Celia, sa inyong makabuluhang panayam na pag-isip hindi lamang sa pagiging connection nito sa ethics 1 na kailangan ko mag-discuss, kundi para na rin sa mas malawak pang mga konsepto at praktika ng pamilya sa PA. Dr. Celia takes the issue of the placenta in Hawaii hospitals in 2006 to highlight colonial legacies of representation that continue to endanger indigenous Hawaiian cultural safety. The placenta is not just medical waste after childbirth, but the embodied knowledge of indigenous Hawaiians materially manifested in birthing practices and placental care. The placenta that nourishes the child is the land that feeds the child's family and people. Its required care founds the child within an enclosed community. The colonials forced this knowledge through the dichotomy of the modern traditional and displaces it to the margins of official public health policy and practice. Dr. Celia deploys placental ethics in its context of resistant indigenous knowledge to make the case for epistemological unease and perplexity within hospitals and other institutions. The aim is to encourage within them the epistemological virtues of humility and intellectual curiosity, and to offer new ways of imagining healthcare policies that can integrate the diverse needs of the indigenous communities. Immediately, we see the connection and relevance of Dr. Celia's work to Ethics 1. For example, we can frame it as a moral issue that institutions ought to treat with the weight of a dilemma. This is because, from the point of view of indigenous knowledge, placental care is a demand that has the same force as the truth-based knowledge that underpins the practices of medical care. We can then test our usual Western ethical frameworks and determine which one can best rationalize the integration of the imperative within institutions. We can also add indigenous philosophy as an ethical framework to Module 2, a supplement to the current ethical frameworks of Pantayong Pananaw, Psikologiyang Pilipino, Pilipinohiya, and Filosofiyang Pilipino. Although this approach should not be easy, as there is currently a shortage of materials on indigenous ethical frameworks within Philippine philosophy, hindi lang natin masyadong ginagawa. We can again look at the disciplines of history, literature, or anthropology for resources. As a supplement in Module 2, indigenous philosophies will address crucial absences and obscurities in the course. For example, indigenous philosophies are particularly described as having a functional and a spiritual connection to the land. This is quite clear in Dr. Celia's work, wherein placental care is connected to the value that indigenous peoples put on their land. Additionally, in an endnote in her paper, she explains that cultural safety entails more than respect for spiritual traditions and beliefs, but also support for the land claims related to Hawaiian sovereignty. These points emphasize two concerns that Ethics 1 students eventually contend with. First, the absence of environmental ethics in the modules. And second, the entanglements of moral and ethical issues with politics. More importantly, indigenous philosophies criticize the automatic acceptance of the category of nation in structuring standards for suitable ethical framework. This point is clear with Sus Salazar's Pantayong Pananaw, in which class discussions reveal privileges in the concept and practice of tayo, that tayo deploys exclusionary kami, kayo, sila, even within its supposedly inclusionary discourse. This is also true for Psikologiyang Pilipino and Pilipinohiya. Their insistence on what makes pagkataong Pilipino is often greeted with, hindi naman ako o hindi naman kami ganyan. We might say that these frameworks are normative. But then we return to Dr. Celia's critique. The nation is modern, and other identities, especially indigenous, are traditional. The nation then must be perplexed by the indigenous. This directs us to a threshold to think through the colonial, and as such, the colonial. The literature on post-coloniality has already taught us that the institutions and strategies of empire are passed on to or adopted by nationalists, by the nationalist anti-colonial. Thus, the logic of identity cohering strategy of othering through dichotomies such as modern traditional underpinned the dismissal of non-governable popular movements and uprisings as counter-revolutionary or as backward or as proto-nationalist by the 1898 revolutionary government and by the nationalist history since the 1960s. Further, colonial institutions Philippinized during the American period were preserved into the after-colonial to the detriment of the long oppressed. In his defense of martial law, for example, among UP law alumni in 1973, Marcos credited the 1916 Jones Law as the source of the constitutional provision authorizing his declaration and insisted that the Americans were right in recognizing this prerogative of the chief executive. And are not the present-day killings of Lumans in Mindanao, the dispossession of the Altas of their ancestral lands in Clark and the Sierra Madre, the returning specter of a dam along Chico River that once again threatened the lives of the Kalingas. Are these not like normalized martial law? Do these not remind us of colonial atrocities? The question then is, how must empire and the nation be perplexed? Practically, what strategies are available to the decolonial that avoids what Fanon calls the pitfalls of bourgeois nationalism? Today, thought has so far guided us to three exemplars and their corresponding dangers. Di ka nga ni Nietzsche, ang mga bagay-bagay ay hindi masama o mabuti, bagamat ang mga ito ay mapangalan. The strategies derived from these exemplars are first, indigenous subjectivity must be flexible. Second, it must find strength in the vastness of time and space that encompasses the world. And third, in marginalizing Europe, it must recognize itself as integral in the production of Western thought. Let us look at the first exemplar. An early source of birthing practices in the pantry is Isabel de los Reyes' and Folklore Filipino, published in 1887. Here, the book notes that birthing practices like burning the placenta, deadly discussed by Doc Celia, were widely practiced by the Ilocanos. Actually, hindi lang mga Ilocano, if you ask around, maybe if you ask your parents or your uncles or relatives, probably they know this. There are practices and rituals associated with the placenta and the umbilical cord. Unfortunately, Don Bello was more interested in documenting folklore, which she translated as El Saber Popular, or popular knowledge, than in explaining the worldview underpinning these beliefs and practices. Nevertheless, Don Bello exemplifies a decolonial strategy identified by Benedict Anderson as a flexible positioning of subjectivity vis-a-vis the native, the national, and the colonial via its playful movement from the positions of inside to the inside-outside and to the outside. This allows for a range of decolonizing subjectivities strategically deployed depending on the situation. I representing subjectivity that possesses first-hand knowledge of folklore and available to Europeans, a critical subjectivity with access to Western folklore that makes possible the critique that the numerous superstitions in the country actually originated in Europe, and a limited subjectivity who cannot understand parts of its own culture and as such forecloses cooptation and scrutiny from colonial scholarly objectives. This range of subjectivity sustained Don Bellon's anti-colonial activism that lasted into the American period. Journalist activist, political prisoner, anarchist belligerent in Spain, religious leader, union organizer, and senator. Kaalala-alala lang isang quote sa Endnotes of Celia, while we can indigenize the higher education institutions, our journeys within them can be indigenous. Tingin ko, posible ito sa range ng subjectivities na pinakita ni Don Bello. Ang panganib, syempre, ay kapag nakulong tayo sa isang identity at gustuhin natin ipakaw ito sa lahat. Sa pagkakataong ito, wala tayong pinagkaiba sa colonialismo. The second exemplar is offered remarkably by way of Salazar. Its kasaysayan ng Kapilipinuhan bagong balangkas, diverging from previous historical outlines, divides the Philippine history into three periods: pamayanan, bayan, bansa. Hindi ko lang alam kung familiar na kayo sa ganito, pero parang ito na yung bagong outline ng pagtutunan ng Philippine history. And devotes great attention to pamayanan, previously designated as pre-colonial, and precariously slight, almost historically fleeting from the point of view of history of colonialism, despite lasting from 500,000 BCE to 1588 CE. Immediately, Salazar's balangkas does away with the colonial determination of history that it has nothing to do with, and puts focus on time and space uninhabited by the nation. Perhaps unintentionally, Salazar includes the nation with a historical span of more than 7,000 years, and a spatial expanse from what's now Taiwan to these islands, then to what is now Malaysia and Indonesia, to Madagascar, to the numerous islands of the Pacific, including actually New Zealand, and all the way to Hawaii. Pamayanan shares with this vastness what Salazar calls batayang kalinangang Austronesiano, including linguistic roots in those Austronesian languages. Unlike the nation, which can survive only conceptually through an artificial historical timeline of homogeneous time, tayo might inhabit this vastness. Pero may panganib din sa pag-itukwer ng polo sa kolonyal at sa bansa, para sa mga Pilipinong nararanasan lamang ng pagpapilipino, sa pamamagitan ng iba, gaya ng sa ngayon papapanalo lang sa tennis si Alex Yala, o ni Hydrin, o ni Olivia Rodrigo, baka tawagin ang pagbuhat ng lawak na ito bilang Pilipino sa pamamagitan ng Polynesian chicken, o si Hegel. Nang sinasabi ng arkeolohiya sa kanyang DNA sequencing and comparison ng mga ancient chicken bones, na nagmula raw dito sa Pilipinas. Importante ito, more or less kasi may kulturang kaakibat ang manok. Like, halimbawa, sabong or sari manok or mga luto ng manok. Kaya importante dun sa mga na nag-service na yung bago yung sinabi yung mga na sa Hegel yung sinabi. The third exemplar is derived from the book The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. Here, David's Graeber and Wendrow construct a new framework and sensibility for the writing of human history by deploying current knowledge in anthropology and archaeology as evidence to undermine the Western concept of historical progress, which rationalizes Europe's claim of a superior status vis-a-vis the colonized world. They start this task by asking how did inequality become an important question for Europe and for Rousseau. This might be a costly question, especially in the discipline of philosophy, because we have been led to believe that Western thought has been grappling with these issues for millennia, tracing a history that goes back to the ancient Greeks. Here we realize that the word Western inhabits a related homogeneous time with that of empire or nation, wherein it insists on its presence in periods when it did not exist. To Graeber and Wendrow, the Greek philosophical tradition that started with the Milesians was more Asian and African than European. The point here, however, is that Europe before and during Rousseau was so overly structured by class that inequality was deemed natural. Autonomy was for royalty and the rich, and fraternity cannot get any headway beyond the self-interested patriarchal relations that govern or that determine the day-to-day relations, day-to-day lives. How come the question of inequality and resolve them? Graeber and Wendrow present evidence that the Western notion of natural law, conceptualized through the construction of the noble savage, was a result of Europe's encounter with the eventually colonized world. Missionaries, for example, were ambivalent over their judgment of the natives, both awed and disgusted with their irreverent treatment of leaders, with free women who typically owned their communities' productive properties, with eloquent displays of wisdom in debates that not meant to be won, with porous and indistinct social divisions, and with the imperative of community obligations to support members in need. More specifically, liberty, equality, and solidarity, the ideals of the French Revolution and Enlightenment, were born from dialogue with indigenous Americans in the French North American colonies. This means, very importante, this means that we should not be too hasty in considering Western philosophy and its ideals to the West. As European superstitions were present in Don Bellong's Philippine folklore, indigenous ideals are at the heart of the so-called Western thought. Ngunit wag lang natin patasyahin ang mga impluwensyang ito, pag-aralan at masusing hanapin ang mga pamahalaan nito sa mundo. To reiterate, indigenous subjectivity must be flexible. It must find strength in the vastness of time and space that encompasses the world. And in marginalizing Europe, it must recognize itself as integral in the production of Western thought. The exemplars used to arrive at these strategies are not specially indigenous na fancy world. It will be interesting to read indigenous philosophies written by their thinkers and practitioners, by their people. But reflecting on Lagayate's Iba, under what conditions will they speak and be heard? How will Western-dominated philosophical discourse structure what they write and say, and how they are read? Maraming salamat.
So this is to cap our afternoon. In the message of the Dean this afternoon, she stressed that these conversations are done regularly as a supplement to the youth in particular G course, in our case, F1. These are academic sessions aimed at widening our horizons and perspectives, of going beyond and outside the status quo, our usual activities, our comfort zones. In the welcome remarks of our department chair, Dr. Katrina Tan, she mentioned the need to hold critical thinking, as this enables us to examine our own roots and think of possibilities for us to veer away from the colonial if needed. The talk of Dr. Bardwell-Jones, on the other hand, initiated us in opening ourselves to the realities that are oftentimes marginalized. The action of the Hawaiian people in the placenta and its marginalization is an example of how dangerous it is to neglect the unique cultural experiences of peoples. A careful inspection of Celia's study on fostering a community-oriented epistemology in hospital settings gives us a glimpse that morality is an ongoing dialogue, one which continues to inspect moral issues in all possible angles, and sometimes looking at alternate perspectives. In Dr. Malabed's reaction, this inspection of moral issues in all facets available is further stressed when he said that indigenous knowledge and practices should be accommodated in our ethical considerations. He then links this observation to what we have been doing so far in Ethics 1, of identifying cultural and indigenous knowledge that underpin ethical concepts and frameworks in various contexts. But Dr. Malabed also warns us that being too engrossed in indigeneity may rob us of that ability to go beyond a colonial mentality. Overall, this afternoon's conversations invite us to reflect on the things and even artifacts we often take for granted. The stories and experiences we have mirror the kind of valuation we espouse. The placenta, literally and figuratively, is a powerful image on how not being critical can rob us of that opportunity to find points of union across cultures. The students of Ethics 1, for you, the students of Ethics 1, you will see this afternoon session beneficial when you go to the first and second modules of Ethics 1. To end, the title of Celia's talk best summarize today's conversation. The critical reflection of the moral and epistemological underpinnings of the things we value can make us better understand one another and hopefully make this world a better place. Thank you very much for attending this conversation.